The Papermaker's Daydreams. In the cool hush of dawn, when the mists still clung to the river like memories reluctant to fade, a man rose with the bellows of the town crier. Just before the sun crested the thatched rooftops of the small 17th-century French village of La Rivière. His name was Henri Vallon, a paper maker by trade, a dreamer by necessity. Henri's cottage perched on the edge of the forest, close to the stream that fed his mill, built of timber and stone, worn with generations of sweat and smoke. It breathed with the spirits of labourers long gone. It was here, within this rustic dwelling, that Henri carried out a craft as meticulous as it was thankless. Each morning began the same. A ritual of water, wood, and quiet prayers. He would stoke the fire in his furnace, grind old linen and rags with a heavy stone wheel, and soak them in vats until they softened to pulp. The scent of boiled cotton, sour and musky, filled the air, clinging to his skin and clothes. As he worked, he found solace in rhythm. Lift the mold, dip into the slurry, shake gently, press the water out, stack between woolen felts. Again and again, 100 times by midday. The repetition offered a strange peace, a trance-like state where his body moved automatically, and his mind wandered. It was during these moments, somewhere between the pressing of sheets and the drying on lines strung across the rafters, that Henri dreamed. In his dreams, the sheets of paper fluttered with words he never wrote, inked with poetry in languages he did not speak. He imagined kings reading treaties upon them, poets scripting love in candlelight, revolutionaries penning hope with trembling hands. Each page was a seed, scattered into the winds of destiny. Henri had never left La Rivière, but his paper did. Through the merchant Jacques, his wares reached far-off lands, Amsterdam, Venice, even London. Sometimes Jacques brought letters back, written on Henri's own sheets. He could tell by the watermark, a subtle fleur-de-lis, pressed into the fibers. Though he could not decipher their contents, he cherished them as if they were parts of his own soul returning home. Despite the nobility of his product, Henri bore the weight of survival. The paper trade was fickle. Too much rain, and the drying sheets soured. A poor harvest, and rags became scarce. The guilds demanded their dues. The crown taxed his water. There were months when he could barely afford bread, yet still he worked. He worked because his paper was not merely parchment. It was permanence, in a world where everything else dissolved. Henri's wife, Madeleine, had died giving birth to their only child, Elise. She was 10 now, with her mother's wild curls and Henri's quiet eyes. She would sit near the vats and read from a book of fables, her voice weaving tales into the steam rising from the pulp. It was for her that Henri kept going, binding himself to his daily routine with the invisible cords of duty and love. On Sundays, when the mill was quiet, he would take Elise to the edge of the forest, where the sun broke in golden shards through the canopy. They would sit on a fallen log, and he would tell her stories. Not from books, but from dreams. He told her of a scholar in Florence, who discovered the secrets of the stars with the help of Henri's paper. Of a woman in Constantinople, who wrote letters to her lost love every day, hoping one day to find him. Of a thief, who used a blank page to forge a new identity, and start anew. Elise would listen, eyes wide, and ask if they were true. Henri would smile and say, "They are true somewhere." But the world crept in. In 1683, The tax collectors came again, heavier and more suspicious. They questioned his water usage, inspected his records. Henri showed them the ledgers, the receipts, even the stacks of unsold paper curled at the edges from damp. It wasn't enough. They left with a warning. The next month, Jacques did not return. Winter was cruel. The stream froze. The rags ran out. Elise fell ill. Henri burned some of his older paper for warmth. It felt like cremating part of himself. Yet, spring came. Slowly, the river thawed. Elise recovered. And one day, a new visitor arrived. She was a woman, cloaked in grey, with ink-stained fingers and a satchel full of manuscripts. Her name was Lucienne, a writer from Lyon. She had heard of Henri's paper, seen it in a book of poems. She offered him coin and a contract, regular shipments, good pay. Henri was wary, but hopeful. For the first time in years, he repaired the roof, bought better wool for the felts, gave Elise a new dress, blue like the spring sky. Lucienne stayed for a week, observing. She marveled at the care he took, how each sheet was a labor of love. One evening, she asked him why he did it. Henri paused, hands stained and cracked. Because one day, perhaps long after I'm gone, someone will read something important. Something that matters. And maybe, just maybe, it will be on my paper. Lucienne nodded. Then your hands hold more than pulp. They hold history. The words struck him. He carried them with him, even as years passed. Henri grew older, slower. Elise took over more of the work, with nimble fingers and a mind full of stories. Lucienne's manuscripts grew in number. A book of poetry was published, with a note on the last page, printed on the paper of Henri Vallon, master craftsman of La Rivière. Travelers began to arrive. Scholars, poets, printers. They came to see the man whose paper carried voices across continents. Henri, ever humble, would show them the vats, the molds, the lines strung with sheets drying like laundry from heaven. He never left the village. But through his work, he touched the world. On the day he died, Elise found him in the mill, asleep beside a stack of fresh sheets. In his hand was a letter from Lucienne, announcing her book had won acclaim in Paris. They buried him with a single page in his pocket. Blank. A symbol not of emptiness, but of potential. Of dreams yet to be written. And so, the mill kept turning, the paper kept forming, and the daydreams of Henri Vallon lived on, one sheet at a time. The Tides of Etienne Morel. In the dim stillness before sunrise, the sea murmured like a half-forgotten hymn, and Etienne Morel stirred beneath his woolen blanket. The 17th-century Breton coast greeted him not with fanfare, but with wind and brine, the scent of tide and toil. He rubbed his eyes, calloused fingers brushing sand from his lashes, and rose with a sigh. Etienne was a fisherman, not by ambition, but by blood. His father, and his father before him, had sailed the same coast from the village of Saint Lunaire, casting nets where the sea met stone. The ocean had been both cradle and crucible. It had fed his belly, carved lines into his face, and taken people he loved. Every day began before dawn. Etienne would walk to the beach, the hem of his coat brushing dew-soaked grass, his boots thudding softly on the sand. His boat, the Marianne, waited like an old friend, scarred, weathered, reliable. He would load her with nets, hooks, bait, and a flask of chicory brew his wife left for him before retreating to bed again. The sea was never the same. Sometimes glassy, like a polished mirror reflecting the sky's pink bloom. Other times, cruel, spitting foam and rage like a drunk with a grudge. Etienne knew its moods. He respected its silence, feared its anger, and spoke to it softly, as one does to a sleeping dog. Most days, he fished alone. His companions were gulls, the creak of timber, the slap of oars. He sang old songs to keep his spirits high, Breton ballads passed down from salt-throated ancestors. The rhythm of casting and hauling, mending and sorting, became his meditation. But the sea did not give freely. Storms would rise without warning. Nets tore on hidden reefs. Fish migrated unpredictably. Once, a sudden squall overturned his boat, plunging him into the icy dark. He survived by gripping the keel for hours, praying to saints he barely believed in. When he washed ashore, lungs burning, his first thought was not of gratitude, but of nets to be repaired. There were other challenges, too. Taxes from the crown, levied even on the smallest catch. Competing fishermen, some ruthless, who cut lines or sabotaged traps. And the weight of feeding a family on the ocean's uncertain generosity. Etienne's wife, Colette, kept their small home warm, raised their 2 sons, and prayed each morning he would return. In the winters, the sea grew quiet and deadly. Ice crept into the hull. The wind turned knives. Etienne took to carving wood by the hearth, shaping tiny boats for his sons, or fish with crooked smiles. But when spring came, he was back on the waves, drawn as if by a tide within himself. His greatest joy came unexpectedly. One morning, while hauling a tangled net, he found an iron locket, old and barnacle-encrusted. Inside was a miniature portrait of a woman, dark-haired, smiling softly. He brought it home, showed Colette, who said it must be from a wreck. Etienne kept it above the hearth, a reminder that the sea gave more than fish. It gave stories. It gave echoes of lives lost and found. As years passed, Etienne's sons grew. The older, Louis, left to become a soldier. The younger, Bastien, stayed by his side. He learned the ways of the sea, the pull of the current, the hush before a squall. He asked questions Etienne had no answers for. Why do we fish here? How do you know when to turn back? What if the sea grows tired of us? Etienne would answer with shrugs. Or stories. He spoke of ghost ships seen on foggy mornings. Of a merman who once offered gold in exchange for freedom. Of his own father, who claimed to have seen the Virgin walking on the waves. Bastien listened, eyes wide, absorbing not just knowledge, but reverence. There was a year the fish vanished. No catches for weeks. Men whispered of curses, of sin and punishment. Ken did not believe in such things, but even he grew weary. He considered selling the Marianne, moving inland, becoming a cooper or a miller. Then Bastien suggested sailing farther. Past the shoals, beyond the cliffs. Dangerous waters. Unknown territory. But they tried. For 3 days they drifted, until the sea roiled silver with herring. Nets overflowed. Ken wept, not for the fish, but for the proof that his son had grown wise. Their fortune turned. With new routes, better catches, and help from Bastien, they built a name. Traders paid in coin instead of salt. The home grew sturdier. Colette bought candles that smelled of lavender, But joy never came without shadow. One summer, a plague swept through Saint Lunaire. Colette fell ill. Jen stayed at her side for days, refusing to fish. When she recovered, pale but smiling, he took her hand and led her to the beach. They sat in silence, listening to the waves, as if the sea itself was offering thanks. When Etienne grew old, he passed the helm of the Marianne to Bastien. He stayed ashore, fixing nets, tending the garden, mending boots. But every evening, he walked to the rocks and watched the horizon. Sometimes he'd see a sail, and feel the tug of the tide in his chest. He died in his sleep, dreaming of a calm sea. Bastien buried him in view of the coast, a marker of driftwood and rope beside the shore. The Marianne sailed on, and Etienne's legacy lived in every net cast, every wave braved, every story told on stormy nights. He was a fisherman, and he was eternal. The marketplace list. The bells rang out across the village of Saint Auban, nestled in the green valleys of 17th-century Normandy. Their tones were crisp in the morning air, echoing over sloped roofs and cobbled lanes. The sun had barely crested the eastern hills, but already the village marketplace was stirring. From a modest stone cottage on the edge of the village, a boy named Lucien tightened the leather strap of his satchel and stepped outside. He was 17, lean from long days helping his father in the fields, with hands that bore the calluses of work but eyes that still carried a boy's curiosity. In his pocket, folded twice and smoothed flat again and again, was a scrap of parchment. His mother's shopping list. It read, a loaf of rye bread, 2 salted herrings, onion bulbs, 6 if fresh, goat cheese, tallow, a length of linen for mending honey, if affordable. Lucien mouthed the words as he walked. They were etched in his mind, not from repetition, but from his mother's voice reading them aloud by firelight. She had a way of making even a list sound like a spell. As Lucien descended into the heart of the village, the sounds grew louder. The bleating of goats, the creak of wagon wheels over stone, the sing-song hawking of goods. A blacksmith's hammer clanged in the distance, counterpunted by the whirring of a spinning wheel in one of the stalls. The village square was an organized chaos of colors, smells, and movement. Lucien passed through the old archway and paused. Before him stretched rows of tents and carts, with canopies in shades of red, ochre, and sky blue. Chickens darted between booths. A dog barked from beneath a butcher's table. The smell of baking bread, sweet fruit, wet fish, and manure swirled together like a potion too complex to define. He took a breath and stepped in. First was bread. Madame Roux's stall, always first on the right. Her loaves were wide and brown, scored across the top and still warm. She gave Lucien a knowing smile as he approached. Rye, as always? Yes, madam. 1 loaf, please. She wrapped it in coarse paper and handed it to him. Tell your mother I put in a heel extra. She always liked the heel. I will. Thank you. 1 item down. Lucien tucked the warm bundle into his satchel. Next, fish. The fishmonger's table was flanked by barrels and a bucket of eels still squirming. Old Gaston, nearly deaf and never short on stories, greeted him with a laugh. What's the count today, boy? 2 salted herrings, please. Gaston plucked them from a row, wrapped them in cloth, and handed them over. For your mother, eh? Tell her this batch is less salty than the last. She near turned my ears red with her complaining. Lucien grinned. She said they were strong, but she didn't mean offense. Tell her I know. And tell her I said she ought to buy fresh next time. Lucien moved on, 2 herrings richer. As he walked, he passed a line of stalls selling pottery, copper pans, wooden toys, beeswax candles, and dried herbs hanging like bunches of green stars. The path was slippery with straw and spilled cider, and once, Lucian narrowly avoided a tumble as a piglet dashed across his path. Next were onions. The farmer from Ciellery had them in neat piles. Lucian examined the bulbs, their papery skins crackling under his fingers. 6, if they're fresh, he said. The farmer scoffed. All mine are fresh. Lucian nodded, unbothered by the bluster. He chose carefully, checking for rot or soft spots, and handed over the coins. The farmer counted them slowly, as if each had a secret to tell. Cheese came next. A round, sharp-scented wheel caught his eye. The cheesemonger, a woman with arms like tree trunks, sliced off a wedge. This one's from last month's batch. Strong but soft. Lucian handed over his coins. His stomach growled. He ignored it. Then came tallow, rendered animal fat, used for candles and soap. The chandler, a quiet man with soot-stained sleeves, weighed out a lump and wrapped it in cloth. You'll need more before winter, he said. We're saving for it. The man only nodded. For the linen, Lucian wandered toward the weaver's lane. Here, the sound shifted, the rhythmic slap of looms, the murmur of bargaining, the hiss of shears slicing through cloth. Bolts of fabric in every shade swayed from wooden poles. He found what he needed, a pale, sturdy length, good for mending shirts. He haggled a bit, as his mother had taught him. Not too aggressively. Just enough to earn respect. The final item was honey. This one was not guaranteed. It depended on the price. Lucian approached the honey stall, run by a bearded man with a cart lined in wax and glass jars. Ah, Lucian, the man said. I have a bit of last season's left. Is it within reach? The man scratched his beard and quoted a price. Lucian counted his coins, fingers shaking slightly. Just enough. He exchanged the money, heart lightened. He had everything. But he did not rush home. He wandered instead, weaving back through the stalls. He watched a puppet show for a few minutes, children laughing as cloth figures danced and duelled. He listened to a man with a hurdy-gurdy singing a ballad about a sailor lost at sea. He watched a nobleman's horse clatter past, its hooves striking sparks on the stone. There was life here. In the clamor, in the colors, in the endless rhythm of voices trading words for goods. He saw the old woman selling herbs with fingers stained green. The boy his age sweeping the steps of the inn. The priest frowning over the price of apples. Lucian realized something. His mother's list had brought him here, but it had never been just about items. It was about connection. It was about remembering the faces behind each loaf and onion and wedge of cheese. He turned back toward home. Satchel full, heart fuller. The village buzzed behind him, and above it all, the bells rang again. Not to call the hour, but to mark the music of a day well lived. And Lucian walked on, list complete. But life still unfolding. One market day at a time. And so, as the paper dries, the nets are folded, and the market stalls close for the night, we leave behind the echoes of another time. A time of calloused hands, quiet dreams, and lives woven into the rhythm of the old world. If these stories spoke to you, if they stirred something gentle or curious within, consider subscribing. There's more to come. More voices, more pasts, more forgotten corners waiting to be remembered. Until then, rest well, and good night.